I think what we'll do is, how many people would like another break now to switch? Or do you want to, people want a break? Okay, you ready to go on? Okay, so let's try this. So let's talk about hybrid approaches. There's some comments here that are conceptual, and then we're going to dive into building a bunch of models. So the opening reflection here, for me as a practitioner who practices 4 types of system science modeling, the last one, social network analysis, less strongly than the other 3. System science methods are highly complementary. And I will tell you that different methodologies differ not only in how they represent a system, but most fundamentally in what they're trying to accomplish. The questions that they ask that typically differ. And no one system science methodology offers a replacement for any other. Significant synergies can be secured by using combinations of the methodologies to address a problem, either as separate models related to the same underlying space, or as hybrids within modeling. Now, there's a slide that I've omitted here, but I need to warn you about. The system science space is one that has a lot of, it's not free of partisanship. In fact, there's a lot of partisanship in it. We are dealing with a situation where we are transitioning from an era where system science was little taught. It was taught in fiefdoms, places like University of Michigan for agent-based modeling, MIT for system dynamics modeling, MIT and SUNY Albany. Discrete event modeling was taught predominantly in industrial engineering departments around the country and around the continent. Places of note in the States certainly include Virginia Tech and a number of other big engineering schools. And students were lucky to get exposure to any system science technique. And the number of practitioners who are out there who could speak with authenticity and speak, importantly, without much prejudice, personally, with respect to multiple techniques was close to 0. Students were trained in one technique. That was what their professors knew. And they graduated with expertise in one technique, and they went on to careers applying that one technique to problem after problem. They'd see problems, they had a hammer, and they'd work on that problem. But a lot of the times, they would be hammering screws. They would be doing things that aren't, where their tool wasn't necessarily the best fit from my perspective and this perspective at others. But we are dealing with a situation where that generation trained with those ideas is still very dominant out there in departments, within reviewer pools, within prominent system scientists. And more than that, often their appreciation of other techniques was very limited, and as a result, they tended to be often dismissive of other techniques. And I cannot tell you the number of times that I have heard people who are trained only in one tradition mock, belittle, criticize other techniques with actually pretty little understanding of those other techniques. And often they are doing so in a quite shallow way. They are often implicitly assuming that this other technique is seeking to address the same questions that themselves seek to address, that the standards for applying this other technique are the same as their standards. And there's often a lot of misunderstanding about the technique itself and a lot of wishful thinking about how simplistic this other technique is that doesn't reflect state-of-the-art understanding in that area of the other technique. But one of the biggest mistakes you can make is seeking guidance in this area from people who are trained only in one technique, because they, it's like the director of medicine here for many years who told me, if you go to a surgeon, they're going to want to cut you. If you go to a internal medicine doc, they're going to want to give you a pill. If you go to a shrink, they're going to want to get you on the couch. If you go to an imager, they're going to want to get you in the machine. That's just the way things work when you have siloed disciplines. They're going to look at you and they're going to frame your problems in terms of their understanding. They're going to be thinking what the options are in terms of their ranges of actions, and they're going to want to apply those methods to you. So you have to be very cautious out there in seeking guidance on techniques to seek counsel with folks who have applied many techniques, who have learned through trial and error what works and what doesn't work, and who have avowed themselves to be open-minded in these trade-offs. As far as I'm concerned, so yeah, I'm a geek, okay? I really enjoy the technical side, but I am so committed to the health context. There are so many pressing problems we need to solve. I don't have a lot of time to sit around and try to promote one technique above another or just confine myself to one. I need to help solve problems, and these are real problems and they're pressing problems. And I will use whatever tool is presented to me, and I will innovate those tools where necessary to yield greater value. And I don't spend a lot of my time worrying about whether I'm crossing, into enemy lines or crossing into areas that are not recognized in the traditional breakdowns. And so you will find this is a somewhat contentious area. The good news is that there's a whole generation of people like me, and I could give you names if anyone was interested, who are very open-minded about this. Generally speaking, of my generation, there's a much greater openness to mixing multiple techniques and using multiple techniques. And whether it's at WPI in the form of certain professors there who have expressed new openness, or whether it's at MIT with Hashir starting and even John Sturman saying sometimes supporting things about agent-based modeling, or whether it's in Michigan where system dynamics does get taught in the business school, there is a growing willingness to recognize there is more than one true way, but more than that we need to start thinking about ways we can leverage multiple techniques. I am proud to say that I think here at our institution, we are certainly one of very few worldwide that are really at the forefront of using hybrid modeling. And I am going to tell you in this presentation why I think it is so valuable and give you 5 types of hybrid modeling that in health, which has, as we know, very distinctive characteristics, they tend to offer a great deal of value. These are combinations that I consider indispensable for insights in the health and healthcare area. And you will not, by and large, find them well recognized in the literature because there is so much inertia and so much and so little familiarity across these boundaries. So why do we build hybrid models? Why am I so committed to hybrid modeling? Well, there's several reasons, and broadly I'm going to break them down into, there's a bunch of them up here on the board, but I'm going to break them down into 2 big reasons. One set of reasons has to do with sort of comparative advantages between them. Comparative advantages that could be, it's easier to represent certain things, they resonate with stakeholders more. So if you go to a demographer, often they'll really grok things expressed as stocks and flows at an aggregate level. It kind of fits how they think about the world. If you go to a clinician who's used to dealing with particular patients, they will often feel much more comfortable working with a model where there's a person. That person has a history. They've had episodes of care that they've presented for before that we can talk about and reason about. That resonates with kind of how they think about the world. And that's really important. If you want to build useful models to get used, if you want to have models that secure buy-in and ownership, sense of ownership by people, having that resonance with stakeholders is important. Other models in terms of comparative advantage offer greater computational efficiency, or they offer trade-offs in terms of that. So this is and I would say multi-scale model, the ability to characterize dynamics at multiple scales neatly. That's a comparative advantage issue. But there's another advantage. There's another type of issue that's different. And this has to do critically, ladies and gentlemen, with the role of models as thinking tools or thinking prostheses, in the words of Jeff. Models help us learn more quickly, robustly, and thoroughly from the evidence. They help us sharpen our thinking. And guess what, folks? When you're leading a modeling process, you discover things that will change your expected course of how you want to build this model. You will make discoveries. Wow, just these few assumptions can lead to this behavior. Then we're going to change, how we build the next few iterations of the model to really center around this issue, because that becomes central to our investigation. Or we find, wow, the model is really sensitive to this assumption. We need to represent it in more structure. We need to capture greater levels of heterogeneity here. In short, you learn in the modeling process in a way that sharpens your sense of what the priorities are for modeling. And guess what? That means that sometimes your modeling process is going along smoothly, and then you make a right-angle turn, and then you adjust it, and then you adjust more, because you are learning all along the way. And that is a good thing with a capital A, G, and T. But if you're working with only one technique, you sometimes get in a situation where you start out maybe with an aggregate system dynamics model, you're making great progress, and then you find, wait a minute, this aspect of heterogeneity is pretty darn important. And you have this awkward situation where, okay, I'm going to try to now capture birth weight in a system dynamics model, people's birth weight, and I have to disaggregate it, to stratify it by birth weight categories, which is going to affect all across my model. And it turns out it's hard to make certain of these changes in one tradition alone. Or you discover network structure looks to be really important. And okay, how am I going to capture this in a system dynamics model? Am I going to impose a mixing matrix? And how am I going to capture the fact that we want to intervene upon someone potentially based on their network position? You can contort yourselves, and the contortions begin in a most uncomfortable way. The fact is, if you have a hybrid model, if you're using a modeling package and a modeling approach that has the flexibility to incorporate multiple techniques, you may say, oh, this area is really sensitive. Let's zoom in on it. Let's turn it from an aggregate system dynamics model into an individual level representation for that area of the model. Boom. You kind of enlarge that area of the model with greater detail. Other areas of the model you leave in an aggregate fashion. Very powerful ability to basically adapt your model as you learn to the levels of detail, the levels of representation you need. Another example is you have an agent-based model, and you discover, for whatever reason, based on discussions with stakeholders or learning from the model, we need to represent resource-constrained processes for care seeking. This is a gripe of Jeff and I. So many models of upstream issues, which both of us care so deeply about and really believe in, they omit representations of care processes that actually end up being pretty important for governing people's health. And, I'm a big believer in the importance of social determinants of health and the use of a social epidemiology lens, but I'm also a believer that there are many health conditions where contact with formal caregivers and the informal networks of informal caregivers that support it are really important. And so sometimes you find, oh, I have this agent-based model, and now I want to represent care-seeking processes that are more well-defined with resource limitations on them. And if you have to do it all in agent-based modeling, you're going to set yourself up for a lot of work and potentially bugs, because you're going to be rediscovering the flat wheel about how to implement it. If you have a discrete event model, just put it in there and add it, and you're off to the races, and you can change your direction more easily. So adaptivity, the capacity to kind of adjust your priorities, is supported much more centrally by a hybrid approach. You have the ability to modify this, to change this area of the model, to use this strategy, this other area, to use that other strategy, without force-fitting it all into one lens. You don't have to take your system dynamics model and say, we have to go agent-based. Let's represent the whole population using agents. That way, if not lies madness, it at least lies a lot of frustration and a lot of lost time and a lot of lost opportunity cost. Yes, question.
So I only recently started talking to either of
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a great strategy, and we have some very compelling cases where we built two models of the same basic situation to give insight, and they each inform each other and very powerfully cross-check each other. And we have used that strategy to identify gaps or kind of cases where we were blind to certain effects in one tradition as opposed to the other. And I would say there are times where having a system dynamics model at hand has helped us realize there were bugs in our agent-based model, and cases where having an agent-based model helps us gain confidence in a way we've represented something in system dynamics that we weren't quite sure about because we were kind of in system dynamics with an aggregate model, you often end up putting in place approximations for things that are actually much more structured beneath the surface, and you have some confidence it's probably a good enough thing, but you're not really sure, and an agent-based model can help cross-check that. But an agent-based model can also point you, as to whether you need to add and think about adding an additional element of heterogeneity to that system dynamics model, which could be a pretty heavyweight operation because it can involve stratifying the model all across the model. So I think building up two different models of the same situation is a very good strategy. It is a strategy that is different from having both types in the same model, which adds additional flexibility. But I will tell you that this whole process of first building at an aggregate level and then going and exploiting it is the main technique that Jeff and I try to approach problems with. So we will often first throw down a system dynamics model to help us think through the issues, and then we will go and we will update portions of it as needed with greater detail. And we'll be seeing how we can do that in just a little bit. Is that helpful? Okay, very good. Other questions, comments? Yes?
So I'm guessing you're probably going to get into some level of discussion about this issue, but any logic appears to be the first tool I've become aware of that allows one to potentially somewhat seamlessly integrate different kinds of modeling strategies or methodologies. Are there sort of becoming computer scientists themselves?
I would welcome you amongst our ranks.
If I were 30 years younger. But sort of becoming a computer scientist, are there other tools aside any logic, or is this the only game?
No, it's not the only game in town. The fact that I teach this is a reflection of the fact that I think it's the best right now. It's not the only tool we use. So we have, for years, been pretty heavy users of Vensim. We also, this is a popular system dynamics tool. We also have used NetLogo for some exploratory work with some of our partners, and also Repast. We have a number of Repast projects going on. But in fact, AnyLogic is not the only one. What you're seeing is actually as much a sign of the times as it is a sign of just one project. So, for example, Repast has recently incorporated elements of system dynamics within their support. There's a popular DES platform that maybe Scott will remember. Is it Simio or?
I can talk about the discrete
yeah, we're gonna have some discussion of cross-platform trade-offs on Friday, but basically there's movement in the discrete event space in a pretty significant way to incorporate agent-based functionality.
Yeah, but just very briefly, there is in all of the modeling, there's sometimes a confusion between agent-based modeling and object-oriented simulation, and especially historically, Simio and FlexSim, they're very object-oriented, so they have these individual things. But in the sense of agency and learning behavior and other things I was associated with agent-based modeling, I wouldn't say they're quite there yet. But as Dr. Murphy said, there's basically a rush to this.
Yeah.
Because right now, AnyLogic has one best platform.
That's right.
For doing
That's right. Vensim has actually recently taken moves to incorporate agent-based modeling. I can't speak to that directly, but I understand they've rolled out functionality for that now. And I think NetLogo now has some ability to do system dynamics modeling as integrated with it as well. This is not an isolated thing. AnyLogic has been a market leader in sort of tapping in to the need to do this, and it's onto something, and it is onto it in part because of people like Jeff, who very early on was working with, I think back in AnyLogic 3, back in Denver, but also Jeff and I recently have been really pushing them for certain specific health-specific sort of functionality that emphasizes hybrid modeling. And in fact, the version you're using has benefited from many of those, from some of those changes. Many more are sort of anticipated. So it is a general platform, and it's going to be a hallmark of the next 10 years in modeling. I predict hybrid modeling is going to be really big for a good reason, and I'm going to show you 5 compelling studies in health that I think are 5 compelling sort of cases in health, patterns in health that I think will be very widely used and shape our use of dynamic models going forward. So I think we're going to see this becoming more and more the norm. And it's interesting because back in 2007, I published a paper. It was a very modest paper and one I'm not particularly proud of, but sort of a thought piece paper where I anticipated this evolution, and it's gratifying to see it playing out. So these are the compelling hybrid patterns that we're going to be going through, and we're going to build up several of them. So briefly, just to give you a glimpse, the first has to do with interactions of a service network with individuals represented in the population. So we have agents. These agents are represented using sort of a classic characterization of an agent-based population. They're placed in networks or in geographies, and then they present for care in facilities such as clinics, which are governed by described by discrete event models. So you seek care in processes, or you apply for aid through a governmental program, or you get enrolled in some sort of process, and that is kept track of, and it's resource governed. That's kept track of through a discrete event model. Why would you want to do that? We have several papers that build on this, but one thing is you can neatly capture resource-constrained processes with a lot less work than doing it all in agent-based context, but you can get the flexibility of rich agent-agent interactions and agent-environment interactions by having the agent side of it. So we're going to see this, something like this, probably after lunch, where you build it up. So we're going to have agents, and they live in homes, and they present for care in clinics, and in the clinic they go through a workup, and depending on the level of resourcing in the clinic, they may balk because of long waiting times or proceed through for treatment, and and we could examine within the same model the effect of changing our number of healthcare workers or changing the facility layout in principle. We can examine, in short, rich issues having to do with the processing in the clinic, and also change things at the level of assumptions of the underlying health states. So that's one type of interaction that we see big need for. And some of Dylan's models that we have provided to you combine this with GIS and combine it with going to the nearest clinic according to roads and various features like that add extra levels of texture to the whole thing. So a second component is we divide a model so that we characterize an aggregate population that's much larger. Maybe it's most of Saskatchewan. And then we have kind of a zoomed in view, as it were, at a special at-risk or high-risk population. So the idea here is that we want to capture individuals from the broader population at a rough level. Oops, sorry, I knocked it out of that. Okay, here we are. So we capture a broader population at an aggregate level. We don't need all the detail. We don't need all the mechanism. But then once people reach a certain point in the risk continuum, maybe it's development of prediabetes or it's development of at least one serious chronic condition, or maybe it's the development of early stages of adverse mental health, or maybe it's occurrence of the first bits of suicidal ideation. We represent people at a much greater level of detail. We capture their social networks, where they go, the episodes of care they undergo. We capture aspects of their family context in ways that allows us to deal with them. So here we have an aggregate model and an individual model, and we'll be building this one as well. I'm building this up. People become, and at this point, they become budded off into people, into individuated agents that we then follow. So what's the advantage of this? Well, there's a couple things. So first of all, we have our ABM focusing on a very specific population with specific needs, characteristics, habits, behaviors, etc. We don't need to use ABMs to represent the entire population, which may exist in a much more, in a far less constrained way. That upstream population, while it's of interest in feeding this, we don't need to represent all the vagaries of it, all the sort of different contexts that may be applying there. We'll represent them in a rough and ready way with a system dynamics model, and then they flow and become agents. And remember, one of the arguments I had for this sort of modeling is adaptivity. Later, we may push this up to include the at-risk population. And if things are really compelling later and we decide we need to really represent this in more detail, we may either stratify this by many aspects of heterogeneity, or eventually we may choose to represent this at an individual level, but we're not forced into that. We're not forced because we're doing an agent-based model. The whole thing has to be agents. Far from it. We get a lot lighter weight simulation. 80% of the population, maybe 90%, is characterized with a system dynamics model, much lighter weight. We put our computational resources into things we care most about. Bigger bang for the buck. Faster experimentation. You can run it quickly, get that loop of insight going to advance your learning, and you shape the evolution of the model. That's really important. These models are learning tools, and facilitating that learning through lightweight experimentation really adds something to the process. It may mean your stakeholders can interactively run the model, which is powerful. And so we have papers which deal with this, including a tripartite frameworks combined with the first one. Here's another one. This harks back to work we published 2007 on immunoepidemiology, where we are tracking people's immune system status over time with stocks and flows. So here we have agents. These agents are characterized in networks. They may be family networks, maybe needle sharing networks, or sexual networks, or multiple sorts of networks, family and collegial connections and shared use of drugs. And here, within each agent, we have, perhaps not exclusively, individual dynamics captured with stocks and flows.
Say that again.
So within each of these agents, we have some or all of their behavior captured with stocks and flows. Generally, it's just some. So we may have state charts for some types of distinctions, discrete distinctions, but we have dynamics associated with continuous factors like their weight, or their stress levels, or their level of immune activation, or level of cytotoxic T lymphocytes that are activated, or their level of distress. We have that captured with stocks and flows. And this allows us to make use of kind of theory-driven models. There's all literature that most people from agent-based modeling are not so aware of, but there's a huge literature of theory-driven, theory-driven models associated with. I have to call you back. Hi. Yeah, I'm teaching. Yeah. No. I'll be maintained by the supply I have. Thanks. Okay. Bye. Sorry. I was offering me a supply of lozenges. That's most appreciated. Very kind. Here we have this theory-driven, the capacity to incorporate theory-driven models that are differential equation based, like those from Kevin Hall, like those from Guyton and others, have to do with physiological processes, to characterize the continuous dynamics. But we can make use of, additionally, elements that are discrete in character, like state charts, for things that are more categorical, things that are discrete. And this allows us to describe declaratively, for much of it, sort of dynamics. It allows us to characterize simultaneously the states of individuals, the actions that change those states as captured by these flows, and the conditions under which those actions take place, as indicated by the formulae here, and the fact that they're coming into and out of a given state, very nicely using these stocks and flows within a given agent. So here, for example, we could capture an agent's changes in their immune system activation as they are exposed to infection, to pathogen, through interactions with those around them. Yes?
I think I understand it, but what was the question here for this particular?
This particular question that we were interested in was understanding how differences in immune system strength throughout a population would impact the spread of infection through that population. So we were interested in the fact that conditions like flu do not disappear entirely from a population, say, during winter. During summer. They do not live only in Australia or New Zealand. Instead, they actually live in places like nursing homes. They live among individuals whose immune system strength is lower. And we wanted to understand how variability, how heterogeneity associated with immune system strength led to changes in the spread of infection in the greater population. We are also interested in understanding the interaction with vaccination mechanisms. The fact that vaccination regimens have one degree of protection that they offer the population, but another degree of protection from pathogens lie internal, in the fact that if we're exposed to pathogen on a day-to-day basis, in many cases, it just boosts our immune system complement, so we may feel lousy for a day, but really our immune system is multiplying cells to defend against this pathogen. And we were interested in the interaction between those two conditions and its implications for vaccination policy. But a key need was to represent the impact of variability in immune system strength. Variability in immune system strength on the part of individuals, which would simultaneously affect, and this is important, it simultaneously affect their likelihood of getting infected, their likelihood of being able to, how high the infection level goes, their viral load level, and how quickly they recover from infectivity. It affects all of those things, and the best way we thought to investigate that was to use theory-driven models from lab experiments concerning the dynamics of infection within an individual, and to then link those individuals up in the sort of networks that might come about through a social context, so we could see how my viral load level, for example, might leak over to some exposures for you due to shedding. Is that helpful? Yeah. Okay, another case where we've used this is simulating the buildup of pathogen reservoirs. And Narges, one of our TAs, has a very nice model of a spread of MRSA within a facility built with one of Cheryl's students, Mustafa, as well as Osagi Osamwegi, who, where basically within a facility you have shedding going on surfaces of MRSA There's dynamics associated with those surfaces in terms of diode of MRSA. There's cleaning events, and individuals also have their internal dynamics with respect to infection. They can get infected from surfaces as well as from each other. Alternatively, you may get shedding going on within different contexts that are associated with pathogen reservoirs at certain locations. So this is another example where we have agents, each individuated as patches, and I think this is one that we have to deliver on for one of Cheryl's models in the course of the week and perhaps in the course of the day. Cheryl, we'll get an elf for you. We'll get you an elf. Winchell will, I think, be the designated elf. We'll get her done. So here, each patch would be capturing dynamics associated with mosquito populations or populations of reservoir species such as birds that it would be madness to try to simulate at an agent-based level. There are agent-based models out there that simulate individual mosquito behavior, but the computational load that would be required for Saskatchewan in the summer would be frightful. Perhaps you're encountering some of our avian fowl, but I'll be with you in just a sec. But basically, each patch represents dynamics associated with birds and mosquitoes within it, and each patch is associated with it a certain level of West Nile virus that's extant within that patch, and those individuals might then bite in individual people who could be represented as agents. Scott, yes. Okay. Okay, I'll trust your judgment there, and I'll plan my travel time to Florida accordingly. That's great. Yeah, we don't tend to have much problem with mosquitoes in the winter, and depending on your view, it may be good that the winter has some length to it. So generally between about October and May, we're not really at much risk. Okay, another type of compelling situation is one where we have an aggregate model, which might be characterized with system dynamics, and we have agents represented for particular actors that drive that model. An example might be, these might be tobacco companies or community organizations, and they are interacting with a population that might be represented at an aggregate level. So here, perhaps we're characterizing the population dynamics at a very aggregate level, and these actors are influencing their development of health, for example, by promoting tobacco use or promoting certain types of risk behaviors associated with eating. So, here we will sometimes see interactions the other way, and I'll be talking about those in a minute. But we have a higher level dynamics that can be very neatly captured, as well as the ability to capture a sub-piece of our population or a population of interest at an agent-based level. This might be, for example, dynamics associated with policies and regulation of policies, or associated with rollout of interventions that we capture. Finally, we do have cases where a higher level model that's captured in system dynamics might affect, for example, an agent population. This might be dynamics associated with weather or climate change, dynamics associated with a mosquito population, and that affects agents who are individuated at the level of individual persons, so that we can capture kind of the rate at which they're bitten. Again, a fit of madness would require this model to be captured at an agent level. We can do so much better by combining the two. So it is hard for me to believe that in the health modeling space, we will not see the field filled with these sort of models. There are just such compelling patterns, and it would be so crazy to ignore this opportunity, especially given the level of functionality that's already afforded by tools like AnyLogic to weave these together. So should we see how a few of these can be built? Yes. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, fire up your AnyLogics and prepare for action. TAs, enter the structure. Question, yeah. They will work in PLE, yeah, easily. Thank you for the question, yeah. Okay. Okay, so it's good to see some TAs here. Thank you for presenting. And we're going to now begin some exploration. So please fire up any logic, and I would like you to close the model from yesterday so that we start with a blank slate, okay? And I think I will stop this